The telegram arrived on a Tuesday, 3 weeks before Caleb Mercer's 32nd birthday. Inside the yellowed envelope was a death sentence written in legal language. Marry within 21 days or lose everything his family had bled for across 3 generations. Standing in the ranch house that smelled of dust and failure, Caleb made a choice that would either save him or destroy what was left of his pride. He walked to the Red Hollow Gazette office and paid for an advertisement no desperate man should ever have to write. Honest woman wanted for immediate marriage. No romance promised. Practical arrangement only. It is days. If you want to know whether a newspaper bride can save a dying ranch and a broken man, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The drought had lasted 4 summers. Caleb Mercer stood at the edge of his father's land, his land now, technically, though the bank might argue otherwise, and watched the sun turn the western sky, the color of an old bruise. The cattle were gone, sold off last winter when the feed ran out and the creek bed cracked into 1,000 pieces like broken pottery. The soil beneath his boots had gone from rich black to gray dust that the wind scattered with casual cruelty. He was 31 years old and felt 60. The ranch house behind him slouched against the hill like a drunk leaning on a bar. Paint peeled from the shutters in long strips. The porch sagged on the north side where the support beam had rotted through 3 years back. He kept meaning to fix it. He kept meaning to fix a lot of things. His father had died in March. Heart gave out while he was checking fence posts in the north pasture. They found him 2 days later, already stiff, one hand still gripping the wire he'd been stretching. The funeral was small. The will reading was smaller. That's when Caleb learned about the condition. Your father was very specific about this clause, the lawyer had said, not quite meeting Caleb's eyes across the scratched oak desk. The man's name was Horace Kettering, and he had the soft hands of someone who'd never worked a day outside an office. The ranch passes to you in full only upon the condition that you marry before your 32nd birthday. Should you fail to meet this requirement, the property reverts to your cousin Marcus in Denver. Caleb had sat there, stunned silent, while Kettering shuffled papers with the nervous energy of a man delivering bad news. Why? The word came out rougher than he intended. Kettering cleared his throat. Your father felt strongly that the ranch needed a woman's touch, that a man alone couldn't properly maintain it. He wanted to ensure the family line continued. The family line! Caleb had laughed, a sound like gravel scraping metal. The old bastard couldn't just say he thought I was a failure. Had to make it official. The lawyer said nothing to that. Marcus Mercer was a banker who wore 3-piece suits and had never touched a cow in his life. He'd visited the ranch exactly once, spent 2 hours complaining about the smell, and left. The thought of him owning this land, selling it probably, parceling it off to developers or railroad men, made something dark and furious twist in Caleb's chest. But marriage, that was the trap. Caleb had been engaged once, 7 years ago, to a girl named Sarah Whitmore. Pretty thing with yellow hair and a laugh that sounded like water over stones. They'd planned a spring wedding. Then Sarah's father got a look at the ranch's books, saw the debt and the dry years ahead, and suddenly Sarah discovered she loved a freight clerk in Kansas City instead. She married him 6 weeks later. Caleb didn't blame her. Not really. The ranch was dying even then, and Sarah was smart enough to read the wind. After that, he'd stopped looking, stopped trying. He worked the land alone, ate alone, slept alone in the same bed his father had died in 30 years of loveless marriage to a woman who'd passed from fever when Caleb was 12. He told himself he preferred it this way. Simpler, cleaner. No one to disappoint when the crops failed again. Now the will had made isolation impossible. 3 weeks. 21 days to find a woman willing to tie herself to a failing ranch, and a man who barely spoke unless the silence got too heavy. The first week, he did nothing. Stubborn pride kept him frozen. He worked the fences, repaired the barn door, avoided town. Maybe he'd just let it all go. Let Marcus have it. Move somewhere else, start over. Except he couldn't. This land had his father's sweat in it, his grandfather's blood. They'd built something here, even if time and weather were tearing it down now. Walking away felt like betraying ghosts. So on the 8th day, he rode into Red Hollow. The town squatted in the valley like something ashamed of itself. One main street, dusty and wide, lined with buildings that looked temporary even after 20 years. The saloon on the corner, the general store, the bank with bars on the windows, the church with its crooked steeple, and the Red Hollow Gazette, a newspaper office run by a perpetually ink-stained man named Gideon Morse, who smelled like whiskey and old paper. Caleb tied his horse outside and stood on the boardwalk for a full minute, trying to make himself go inside. "You gonna stand there all day, Mercer?" Old Tom Henley shuffled past, dragging a cane through the dust. "Or you finally gonna place that ad?" Caleb turned. "What?" "Whole town knows about your daddy's will." Henley's grin showed 3 brown teeth. "Lawyer Kettering can't keep his mouth shut when he's drunk, which is often. You here to find yourself a wife?" Heat climbed up Caleb's neck. "Mind your own business, Tom. Just saying, if I was you, I'd hurry. Deadline's coming up fast." Henley cackled and kept walking. Inside the Gazette office, Gideon Morse looked up from his desk with eyes that had seen too many bad stories and not enough good ones. "Help you?" Caleb pulled off his hat, twisted it in his hands. "I need to place an advertisement." "What kind?" The words stuck in his throat like swallowed glass. He forced them out. "Personal ad. Looking for a wife." Morse didn't laugh, didn't even smile, just pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and dipped his pen in ink. "Dictate." Caleb thought about it. What did a man even say in a situation like this? How did you advertise for a partner when you had nothing to offer but hard work and a property that might not last the year? "Honest woman wanted," he began slowly, "for immediate marriage. Rancher, age 31. No romance promised. Practical arrangement only. Must be willing to work hard. Respond to Caleb Mercer, Red Hollow, Montana Territory." Morse wrote it all down without comment, though his eyebrows climbed higher with each word. When he finished, he read it back aloud. It sounded worse spoken than it had in Caleb's head. Cold. Desperate. "That's $5 for 2 weeks in the classifieds," Morse said. "Goes to print Friday. We distribute to 6 towns, plus the territorial capital." Caleb counted out the money, coins he couldn't afford to spend. "Mercer." Morse looked at him across the desk. "You sure about this? Mail-order brides, they're a gamble. You might get someone decent. Might get someone running from the law. Might get someone who takes one look at your ranch and gets right back on the train." "I don't have a choice," Caleb said flatly. "Everyone's got a choice." "Not me. Not this time." He left before Morse could say anything else. The next week crawled by like a wounded animal. Caleb threw himself into work, fixing things that didn't need fixing, writing fence lines that hadn't seen cattle in months. Anything to avoid thinking about the advertisement, about what kind of woman would answer it, about whether anyone would answer it at all. 10 days after the ad ran, the first letters arrived. Gideon Morse brought them out to the ranch himself, riding up in his wagon with a bundle wrapped in twine. "You got popular fast," he said, handing them over. 17 replies. 17. Caleb took them inside, spread them across the kitchen table, and started reading. The first was from a woman in Billings who wanted to know if he owned the ranch outright or if there was debt. The second was written in handwriting so bad he couldn't make out half the words. The third included a tintype photograph of a woman who looked 80 years old. The fourth opened with, "Dear Sir, I am willing to marry you sight unseen if you can promise me 3 square meals and a roof that don't leak." He kept reading. Some were sad. Women with children and no husbands, desperate enough to gamble on a stranger. Some were greedy. Women asking about property value, inheritance, whether he had savings. Some were just lonely, their letters filled with crossed-out words and hopeful phrases that made his chest ache, but none of them felt right. He was down to the last 3 letters when he opened the one from Evelyn Hart. The handwriting was neat, efficient, no wasted loops or flourishes. The paper was cheap but clean. And the words, "Mr. Mercer, I read your advertisement with interest, though I confess the phrase 'no romance promised' made me smile. Most men lie about that part. I appreciate your honesty, even if it's brutal. I am 28 years old. I teach school in St. Louis. I have no family to speak of and no particular ties to this city. I'm not looking for love. I tried that once and found it unreliable. What I want is a purpose, a place to be useful, work that matters. Your advertisement suggests you need a partner more than a wife. That suits me. I can keep books, manage a household, work with my hands. I don't tire easily, and I don't complain often. I won't expect poetry or flowers. I will expect honesty and fair treatment. If that sounds acceptable, wire me the train fare and I'll come see your ranch. If we don't suit each other, I'll return your money and go back. No harm done. Respectfully, Evelyn Hart Caleb read it 3 times. No romance promised made me smile. Most men lie about that part. I tried that once and found it unreliable. Something about her words cut through the fog of desperation that had surrounded him for weeks. She wasn't begging, wasn't flattering, she was negotiating, treating it like what it was, a business arrangement between 2 people who needed something from each other. He looked at the other 2 letters. One was from a widow with 5 children, the other from a girl who couldn't have been older than 18, writing in purple ink about how she'd always dreamed of ranch life. He picked up Evelyn Hart's letter again. The next morning, he rode into town and sent a telegram to St. Louis with enough money for a train ticket west. The wait nearly killed him. Every day he checked with the telegraph office. Every day, nothing. He started to think she'd changed her mind, pocketed the money, decided a rancher in Montana wasn't worth the trouble. Then, 14 days after he'd sent the wire, a response came through. Arriving Red Hollow, June 14th, stop, 4 p.m. train, stop, E. Hart. June 14th. That gave him 3 days. He spent them like a madman, cleaned the house for the first time in 6 months, scrubbing floors and washing windows until his hands were raw. Fixed the porch sag with lumber he'd been saving for fence posts. Aired out the spare bedroom, beating the dust from blankets that had sat unused for years. He even rode into town and bought new sheets, spending money he didn't have, because the thought of her arriving to filthy linens made him feel sick with shame. On the morning of the 14th, he put on his one good shirt, shaved for the first time in a week, cutting himself twice in the process, saddled his horse, and rode to town 2 hours early, too nervous to wait at the ranch. Red Hollow's train station was barely a platform with a roof over it. He stood there in the sun, watching the eastern horizon, while townsfolk gave him curious looks and whispered behind their hands. At 4:10, the train came around the bend, smoke trailing black against the blue sky. Caleb's heart kicked against his ribs like a panicked horse. The train slowed, brakes screaming metal on metal. Steam hissed from the engine. 3 people got off. An old man with a carpet bag, a woman in a traveling dress carrying a crying baby, and her. She stepped down from the passenger car with one small trunk and a canvas bag slung over her shoulder. No fancy hat, no silk dress, just a simple gray traveling outfit, dusty from the journey, and dark hair pulled back in a severe knot at the base of her skull. She looked around the platform with sharp, evaluating eyes that missed nothing. Caleb walked toward her, hat in his hands. "Miss Hart?" She turned. Her gaze landed on him like a physical thing, direct, unflinching, taking his measure in 3 seconds flat. "Mr. Mercer, I presume?" Her voice was lower than he'd expected. Calm. No trace of nervousness or second thoughts. "Yes, ma'am." He cleared his throat. "Welcome to Red Hollow." "It's smaller than I pictured." She glanced down the dusty main street. But then, most places are smaller than advertised. He couldn't tell if she was disappointed or just stating facts. "Can I take your trunk?" "I can manage." But she let him pick it up anyway, testing him maybe, watching how he moved under the weight. They walked to where his horse was tied. Evelyn looked at the animal, then at him. "I assumed there'd be a wagon." "Sold it last winter. I can get the livery to rent us one if—" "No need." She set her bag down and reached for the saddle horn. "I can ride double if you can." She pulled herself up before he could offer help, settling into the saddle like someone who'd done it before. He swung up behind her, acutely aware of how close she was, how straight she sat, how she didn't lean against him or make small talk to fill the silence. They rode out of town with half of Red Hollow watching. The ranch looked worse than usual in the late afternoon light. The peeling paint, the sagging barn, the fields that should have been green with crops but were just dust and dead stubble. Evelyn took it all in without comment. He helped her down and carried her trunk inside. She followed him into the house, her footsteps quiet on the wood floors he'd scrubbed raw 3 days ago. She walked through the front room, the kitchen, looked out the back window at the garden plot that hadn't been planted this year. Finally, she turned to face him. "Show me the books." "The books?" financial records, debt ledgers, whatever system you use to track expenses and income. She said it matter-of-factly, like asking for a glass of water. Caleb's face heated. I don't exactly keep formal books. Show me what you have then. He pulled out the battered ledger he'd been using, pages filled with his scratched handwriting, numbers that didn't always add up right, dates he'd sometimes forgotten to record. He set it on the kitchen table and waited for her judgment. Evelyn sat down and opened it. She didn't say anything for a long time, just turned pages, her finger tracking down columns of figures. Her expression never changed. After 10 minutes, she closed the ledger. When did you last turn a profit? 2 years ago. Small one. How much do you owe the bank? He told her, watched her absorb the number without flinching. And your father's will requires you to marry before your birthday, which is June 28th, 2 weeks from tomorrow. She nodded slowly. That explains the urgency of your advertisement. I wasn't trying to trick anyone, he said, defensive. I meant what I wrote. It's a practical arrangement. You'd be helping me keep the ranch. In return, you'd have a home, security. Security? She almost smiled. On a property that's 2 bad seasons from foreclosure. I'm working on it. I can see that. She gestured at the ledger. You work hard, Mr. Mercer, but you're not working smart. You're bleeding money in places you don't need to be. Buying feed at inflated prices when you could negotiate bulk rates. Paying interest on loans you could refinance. You're running this ranch like a man trying to bail out a sinking boat with a teacup. The words should have stung. Instead, they just sounded true. Can it be fixed? He asked. She looked at him, really looked at him, like she was weighing something heavy in her mind. I don't know, she said finally, but I know it can't be fixed the way you've been doing it. Silence fell between them, thick and strange. Miss Hart, Caleb said carefully, why did you come here? You're educated. You could teach anywhere. Why answer an advertisement from a desperate rancher in the middle of nowhere? She was quiet for a moment, then, because I'm tired of being alone in rooms full of people. Because St. Louis has nothing for me except more years of the same empty routine. Because when I read your advertisement, I thought, here's someone who isn't lying about what he wants. That seemed worth the train ride. Something unknotted in his chest. I can't promise this'll be easy, he said. The work's hard, the land's harsh, money's tight. I didn't come here for easy. And the marriage? I meant what I said. It's practical. I won't expect... He stumbled over the words, heat crawling up his neck again. I won't expect anything a wife normally. I mean, you'd have your own room, your own space. I appreciate that. Her voice softened just slightly. Though we should probably actually get married before we worry about the logistics. Right. He felt like an idiot. Yes, of course. Is there a preacher in town? Reverend Michaels. He's usually drunk by evening, but sober enough in the mornings. Then we'll go tomorrow morning. She stood up, brushing dust from her skirt. For now, I'd like to wash up and see the bedroom you mentioned in your letter. It's been a long journey. He showed her to the spare room. It was small and plain, just a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked east toward the sunrise. She set her trunk down and looked around with the same evaluating expression she'd given everything else. This is fine, she said. Thank you. He left her there and went outside, needing air, needing space to think. What the hell had he just done? In less than 24 hours, he'd be married to a woman he'd met 3 hours ago. A woman who'd read his desperate advertisement and decided to gamble her future on a failing ranch, and a man who could barely look her in the eye. He sat on the porch steps and watched the sun sink lower, painting the drought-dead fields in shades of amber and rust. Inside the house, he heard water running, Evelyn washing away the train dust, settling into a life she'd chosen based on nothing but a few honest sentences in a newspaper and her own tired loneliness. For the first time in weeks, Caleb felt something other than despair. He felt responsible, not for the ranch. He'd been responsible for that his whole life. But for her, for the choice she'd made to trust his words and come west, for the fact that she was here now, in his house, betting her future on his ability to save a piece of land that might already be lost. The sun touched the horizon. Caleb stood up, brushed the dust from his pants, and went inside to start dinner. Tomorrow, they'd go to town and get married by a drunk preacher in front of whatever witnesses they could scrape together. Tomorrow, Evelyn Hart would become Evelyn Mercer and bind herself legally to a man she didn't love and a ranch that might drag them both under. But tonight, he could at least make sure she had a decent meal. He was halfway through slicing potatoes when she appeared in the kitchen doorway, her hair still damp, wearing a different dress, simpler, made for work instead of travel. "Can I help?" "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." She walked to the counter and picked up the knife. "But if we're going to be partners, we might as well start now." They cooked together in silence, moving around each other in the small kitchen like dancers learning new steps. She was efficient, no wasted motion, and she didn't ask him where things were, just looked until she found them. When the food was ready, they sat across from each other at the scarred wooden table. "This is good," Evelyn said after the first bite. "My mother taught me, before she died." "How old were you?" 12. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "My mother died when I was 9. Cholera. My father remarried within 6 months. The new wife didn't much care for me. I left home at 16. "That's young?" "I was tall for my age, lied about being 18, and got a teaching position in a one-room schoolhouse outside Springfield. Worked my way east from there." They ate in silence for a while. "Do you regret it?" Caleb asked. "Coming here?" She considered the question seriously. "Ask me again in 6 months. Right now I'm just tired enough that any place with a bed seems like a good decision." He almost smiled at that. After dinner, she helped him wash dishes. Then she excused herself and went to her room. He heard the door close, the sound of her moving around, settling in. Caleb sat on the porch until full dark, smoking a cigarette he'd been saving for a special occasion. This didn't feel special exactly, but it felt like something, an ending, a beginning, a chance. He ground out the cigarette and went inside, lay on his own bed in the dark and stared at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sound of another person breathing in the next room. Tomorrow, he'd marry Evelyn Hart. Tomorrow, everything would change. Whether that change would save him or finish what the drought had started, well, he'd find out soon enough. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose shutter he'd been meaning to fix for 3 years. In the distance, thunder rumbled, promising rain that probably wouldn't come. Caleb closed his eyes and waited for morning. They married at 9 in the morning when the sun was still low enough to be forgiving. Reverend Michaels smelled like coffee and regret, his hand shaking just slightly as he opened the worn Bible on his desk. The ceremony took place in his cramped office behind the church because he said the sanctuary was being cleaned, though Caleb suspected he just didn't want to make it official in front of empty pews. Evelyn wore the same gray dress from the day before. Caleb had put on his good shirt again, the one with the frayed collar he'd tried to hide by buttoning it all the way up. They stood side by side in front of Michael's desk, while Gideon Morse and the Reverend's housekeeper served as witnesses, both of them looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Do you, Caleb James Mercer, take this woman?" "I do," Caleb said, cutting him off. He wanted it done, over with, legal. Michaels blinked, thrown off his rhythm. "Well, and do you, Evelyn—" He paused, realizing he didn't know her middle name. "Anne," she supplied quietly. "Evelyn Ann Hart, do you take this man—" "I do." Michaels looked between them, seemed to sense that drawing this out would be a mistake, and skipped straight to the end. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I pronounce you husband and wife." He closed the Bible with a thump. "You may kiss the bride." Silence dropped like a stone. Caleb's face went hot. He hadn't thought about this part, hadn't considered that even a practical marriage required this moment of performance. Evelyn solved it. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his cheek, quick and businesslike, then stepped back. "Thank you, Reverend," she said. Michaels looked disappointed by the brevity but handed over the marriage certificate without comment. Morse signed as witness, his signature a mess of loops and flourishes. The housekeeper made her mark with an X. And that was it. They were married. They walked out of the Reverend's office into morning sunlight that felt too bright for the occasion. A few townspeople lingered on the street, trying not to stare too obviously. Caleb saw Mrs. Henderson from the general store whisper something to her daughter, both of them watching Evelyn with naked curiosity. "We need supplies," Evelyn said, ignoring the attention. "For the house and the ranch. I made a list this morning." She pulled a folded paper from her pocket. Caleb took it, scanning the neat handwriting. Flour, sugar, salt, coffee, lamp oil, seeds for the garden, chicken wire, nails. At the bottom, she'd written estimated costs. "This is more than I usually spend in a month," he said. "I know, I saw your ledger, remember?" She started walking toward the general store. "You've been trying to survive on nothing. That's not sustainable. We need to invest in things that will generate return. Chickens for eggs we can sell, a garden that'll reduce food costs, basic repairs that'll prevent bigger problems later." He followed her, feeling like he was 2 steps behind in a conversation he didn't fully understand. Inside Henderson's general store, Evelyn moved through the aisles with the efficiency of someone who'd been managing household budgets for years. She checked prices, compared goods, made notes on her list. Mrs. Henderson herself came over, all false sweetness. "Mrs. Mercer, is it now?" The emphasis on the name was just sharp enough to draw blood. "Yes." Evelyn didn't look up from examining a sack of flour. "Well, that was certainly a quick courtship. It was practical." Evelyn set the flour on the counter. "We'll take this one. And 2 pounds of coffee, the darker roast." Mrs. Henderson's smile tightened. "You know, dear, we don't usually extend credit to new accounts, given the circumstances." "We're paying cash," Evelyn said calmly. Caleb stepped forward, pulling out the money he'd been saving for emergencies. It hurt to hand it over, but Evelyn was right. They needed these things. Mrs. Henderson rang up the purchases with pursed lips, clearly disappointed she couldn't refuse them. When they left, loaded down with packages, Caleb heard her whisper to someone, "Mail-order bride, can you imagine?" Evelyn's expression didn't change, but her jaw tightened just slightly. They loaded everything onto the horse and headed back to the ranch. The ride was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived, Evelyn didn't wait for him to help her down. She slid from the saddle and started carrying supplies inside before he'd even dismounted. Over the next week, Caleb learned what it meant to have a partner. Evelyn didn't just keep house. She attacked the ranch's problems with the same systematic approach she'd used in the general store. She reorganized the kitchen for efficiency, throwing out rusted cans and weevil-infested flour Caleb hadn't even known was bad. She cleaned the chicken coop that hadn't held chickens in 2 years and made him go back to town to buy 6 hens and a rooster. "They'll start laying within a month," she said, scattering feed while the birds pecked around her feet. "Eggs we don't eat, we sell. It's not much, but it's income." She replanted the garden plot, working in the dirt for hours under the brutal sun. Caleb offered to help, but she waved him off. "You need to fix the irrigation system," she said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "I saw the old channels. They're clogged with debris. Clear them out, and we might actually keep these vegetables alive through summer." He did what she said. Spent 3 days digging out ditches and replacing rotted wood, his back screaming by evening. When he finished, Evelyn tested the water flow and nodded with satisfaction. "Good. Now repair the barn door before we lose what's left of the feed to rats." She was relentless, but she was also right about everything. Within 2 weeks, the ranch looked different. Not prosperous. It would take more than cleaning and minor repairs to fix years of neglect, but less like a place waiting to die. The house smelled like soap instead of dust. The chickens clucked contentedly in their coop. Green shoots appeared in the garden rows, and the books began to make sense. Evelyn took over the ledgers completely. She set up a proper accounting system, tracking every expense and income source. She identified 3 loans Caleb was paying interest on that could be consolidated into one at a lower rate. She found a feed supplier 2 towns over who'd sell bulk at half what he was paying locally. "You were being robbed," she said flatly, showing him the price comparison. "Henderson's been charging you premium rates because he knew you were desperate." Caleb felt stupid and angry. "I didn't know." "Now you do." She closed the ledger. "From now on, we buy feed from Miller's in Copper Creek. I'll handle the negotiations." She did. Rode into town the next day and came back with a contract that made Caleb's eyes widen. "How did you get him to agree to this?" "I told him we'd be repeat customers, and Henderson's had been overcharging us. Miller smelled an opportunity to steal business. Men like him can't resist that." She hung her hat on the peg by the door. "We pick up the first order Friday." They fell into a routine that was almost comfortable. Caleb worked the land, doing the heavy lifting, the fence repairs, the endless physical labor. Evelyn managed the house and the books, turning chaos into order. They ate meals together, discussed ranch business across the dinner table like business partners reviewing a contract. At night, they retreated to separate rooms. Caleb was careful about that, never pushed, never assumed. The marriage was legal but unconsummated, and he was fine with that. More than fine. He didn't know what to do with a woman in his bed anyway, and the thought of trying made him feel clumsy and exposed. But he was aware of her, constantly. The way she moved through the house, efficient and purposeful. The sound of her humming while she worked, a melody he didn't recognize. The sight of her in the garden at dawn, dirt on her hands, hair coming loose from its knot. She was beautiful in a way he hadn't let himself notice that first day. Not delicate, not soft, but strong. Real. It confused him, this awareness. A month after the wedding, the drought broke with violence. Caleb woke to thunder that sounded like artillery. He stumbled out of bed and looked through the window just as lightning split the sky open. Rain followed, heavy drops that hit the roof like fists. He yanked on pants and boots and ran outside. The garden. They'd planted everything just 2 days ago. If the rain hit too hard, it would wash away the seeds before they could root. He was halfway across the yard when Evelyn appeared beside him, wearing a nightdress soaked through within seconds, her hair plastered to her skull. "The ditches!" she shouted over the thunder. "We need to redirect the flow or it'll flood the whole plot." They ran together to the irrigation channels. Water was already overflowing, turning the garden into a river. Caleb grabbed a shovel and started digging a new channel, trying to route the excess away from the vulnerable seed beds. Evelyn worked beside him, using her bare hands to pile mud into makeshift barriers. The storm hammered them. Wind screamed through the gaps in the barn. Lightning turned night into day every few seconds. Caleb's boots sank into mud that tried to suck them off his feet. "The chicken coop," Evelyn pointed. The small structure was leaning dangerously, wind tearing at the roof they'd just repaired. Caleb ran for it. The door had blown open, and the chickens were panicking, trying to fly in the enclosed space. He grabbed what boards he could find and started bracing the walls while rain poured through holes in the roof. Evelyn appeared with rope. Together they lashed the structure to support posts. Caleb sank into the mud at angles, creating a brace system that looked ugly but held. The chickens slowly calmed, huddling together in the driest corner. They worked through the worst of the storm, securing loose items, diverting water, saving what could be saved. By the time the rain began to ease, Caleb was so exhausted he could barely stand. His hands were bleeding from rope burns. His boots were full of water. Evelyn looked no better. Her nightdress was ruined, torn, and filthy. She had a cut on her arm she didn't seem to have noticed, but she was still moving, still checking the garden channels to make sure water was flowing right. "Evelyn," his voice came out rough. "It's done. We did what we could." She stopped, turned to look at him. Rain still fell, lighter now, pattering on the mud between them. "The seeds might still wash away," she said. "Maybe, but we tried." Something shifted in her expression. The mask she wore, the one that kept everything controlled and managed, cracked just slightly. "I don't want this to fail," she said quietly. "I don't want to fail again." "Again?" She looked away. "I was engaged once, before St. Louis. A lawyer's clerk. Very proper, very promising. He changed his mind 2 weeks before the wedding, said I was too. He called me managing, said living with me would be like living with an accountant." Caleb felt anger rise in his chest. He was an idiot. Maybe. She wiped rain from her face. But he wasn't wrong. I am managing. I can't help it. I see problems and I want to fix them. I see waste and it makes me furious. I know it's not attractive. "Who told you that?" "Everyone." She laughed, but it sounded broken. "My father's wife, my students' parents in Springfield, the school board in St. Louis. They all said the same thing. Women shouldn't be so forward, so opinionated, so difficult." Caleb stepped closer, close enough that he could see the cut on her arm was still bleeding, mixing with rainwater. "You're not difficult," he said. "You're competent. There's a difference." She looked at him, really looked at him, like she was trying to figure out if he meant it. "This ranch would already be gone if you hadn't come here," he continued. "Everything you've done, the books, the garden, the deals you've negotiated, I couldn't have done any of it. I'm not too proud to admit that." "You're just saying that because I'm saying it because it's true. He reached out, hesitated, then gently took her injured arm. You're bleeding. It's nothing. It's not nothing. Come inside. They went into the house, dripping mud across the clean floors Evelyn had scrubbed days ago. Caleb found the medical kit and made her sit at the kitchen table while he cleaned the cut. His hands were too big for the delicate work, but he was careful, gentle. You don't have to. I know, he said, but I'm going to anyway. She fell silent. Let him work. When he finished bandaging her arm, she looked at the wrapping, then at him. Thank you. We're partners, he said. Partners take care of each other. The words hung between them, meaning more than they should. Outside, the storm faded to distant rumbles. The sky began to lighten toward dawn. They sat at the table, exhausted and filthy, listening to water drip from the eaves. I should change, Evelyn said finally. This night dress is ruined. I'll make coffee. She stood, then paused at the doorway. Caleb? He looked up. I'm glad I came here. She left before he could respond. Caleb sat alone in the kitchen as dawn broke, thinking about a woman who'd answered a desperate advertisement and ended up saving more than just a failing ranch. The garden survived. Most of the seeds stayed in the ground, and within a week, green shoots appeared in neat rows. The chicken coop held through 3 more storms. The irrigation channels worked exactly as Evelyn had designed them, but the money was still running out. Caleb knew it, even if he didn't want to admit it. The banknote was due in August. They'd made improvements, yes, but improvements didn't generate income fast enough. The chickens wouldn't produce eggs for weeks yet. The garden wouldn't yield crops for months. They were still bleeding money faster than they could earn it. He found Evelyn in the study she'd claimed as her office, bent over the ledgers with that focused expression he'd come to recognize. How bad is it? He asked. She didn't pretend not to understand. Bad. We've cut costs significantly, but we're still short for the August payment by about $40. $40 might as well have been $400. I could sell the horse, he said. Then how do you work the land? How do we get to town? She shook her head. We need a different solution. I'm open to suggestions. She tapped her pencil against the ledger, thinking. The cattle? You said you sold them last winter. Had to. Couldn't afford feed. But you have pasture. If we could get cattle again, with what money? And it'd be months before we could sell them for profit. What if we didn't buy them? She looked up at him. What if we leased pasture to someone else's cattle? Let them graze here, charge a fee per head. Caleb considered it. Nobody around here has extra cattle. No, but the ranchers up north do. The big operations. They're always looking for summer grazing. They wouldn't deal with us. We're too small. They might if the price was right. She stood up, warming to the idea. We have something they need. Pasture closer to the rail line than their winter ranges. That's valuable. We just need to convince them. How? We write letters, make our case, offer competitive rates. She was already pulling out paper. It's a long shot, but it's better than selling your horse. They spent the evening composing letters to every large ranch operation within 100 miles. Evelyn wrote with the persuasive clarity of someone who'd once taught debate. Caleb provided the technical details about grass quality and water access. They sealed 8 envelopes and rode into town the next day to post them. Don't get your hopes up, Caleb warned as they left the post office. I won't, but I won't give up either. 3 weeks passed. No responses came. Caleb tried not to think about it, throwing himself into work. He repaired more fence line, fixed the barn door for the 3rd time, started building a proper coop for the chickens, something sturdy enough to last years. Evelyn kept the house running and managed their dwindling funds with the skill of someone performing triage. She sold eggs in town as soon as the hens started laying, undercutting Henderson's prices and taking his customers. She preserved everything from the garden, filling jars with pickled vegetables they could eat through winter. They worked side by side more often now. She'd help him with fence repairs, handing him nails and holding posts steady. He'd help her in the garden, following her instructions about spacing and watering. They talked while they worked, real conversations that went beyond ranch business. He learned she'd wanted to be a doctor once, before she realized no medical school would take a woman. That she loved thunderstorms but hated wind. That her favorite book was something called Wuthering Heights, though she admitted the characters were all disasters. She learned he'd wanted to leave the ranch as a boy, had dreamed of seeing the ocean, that his mother used to sing while she cooked, Old songs he couldn't remember the words to anymore. That he'd once caught a fish so big his father didn't believe him until he brought it home. Small things, personal things, the kind of details you shared with someone you were starting to trust. One evening in late July, they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the hills gold. The heat had broken for the day and a breeze carried the smell of sage and dry grass. "The banknote's due in 2 weeks," Evelyn said quietly. "I know. We're still short, even with the egg money." "I know that too." Silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken worry. "Maybe we could ask for an extension," she suggested. "Already tried that last year. They said no. Then we need a miracle." Caleb laughed, hollow. "Those don't come cheap." "No." She pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. "But sometimes they come unexpected." He looked at her, this woman who'd gambled everything on a newspaper advertisement and a stranger's honesty. She looked tired. They both were. Tired of fighting for a piece of land that didn't want to be saved. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what? For dragging you into this. You could have stayed in St. Louis. Found someone better." "Better than what?" She turned to look at him. "A man who works himself to exhaustion trying to save his family's land? A man who keeps his word even when it costs him? You think that's common?" "I think you deserved more than a practical arrangement that might end in foreclosure." "I deserved honesty," she said firmly. "You gave me that from the first letter. Everything else, we'll figure it out." The way she said "we" made something warm and painful expand in his chest. "Evelyn, don't." She stood up abruptly. "Don't say something we'll both regret just because you're feeling guilty." She went inside before he could respond, leaving him alone with the dying light and the weight of everything unsaid between them. The next morning, a telegram arrived. Caleb was in the barn when Evelyn came running out, waving the paper. He'd never seen her run before, never seen her lose composure like that. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." She was breathing hard, her face flushed. "Read it." He took the telegram. "Proposal acceptable, stop, arriving Friday with cattle. Stop, we'll discuss terms, stop. J. Morrison, Double M Ranch." Caleb read it twice. "Morrison's one of the biggest operations in the territory." "I know. He wants to use our pasture." "That's what it says." She was grinning now, a real smile that transformed her whole face. "How much did you quote him?" 50 cents per head per month. That's higher than standard rates. "We're closer to the rail line. I told him that in the letter. I bet his competitors for transport space." She grabbed his arm. "Caleb, if he brings even 40 head, that's $20 a month, more than enough to make the bank payment." He looked at the telegram again, afraid it would disappear. "Morrison's coming here Friday. That's 3 days. Then we have 3 days to make this place look like it can handle his cattle." The joy drained from her face, replaced by familiar determination. "We need to clear the north pasture completely, check every inch of fence, make sure the water sources are clean." They worked like people possessed. Caleb cleared brush from the north pasture, cutting back years of overgrowth. Evelyn walked every foot of fence line, marking spots that needed repair. Together they cleaned out the watering troughs and checked the creek flow. By Thursday evening, the place looked as good as it was going to get. That night, Evelyn cooked a real dinner. Chicken, one of their own hens that had stopped laying, with vegetables from the garden and biscuits made from Henderson's overpriced flour. It felt like a celebration they hadn't earned yet. "What if he doesn't like what he sees?" Caleb asked. "Then we convince him." Evelyn cut into her chicken with precision. "We show him the fence quality, the water access, the grass density. We make him understand what we're offering." "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple, but it's possible. That's enough." Friday came hot and still. Morrison arrived at noon in a wagon pulled by 2 massive draft horses, a hired hand driving while he surveyed the ranch with eyes that missed nothing. He was a big man, 50 years old at least, with silver in his beard and hands scarred from decades of ranch work. Caleb and Evelyn met him in the yard. She'd put on her best dress. He'd shaved and worn his wedding shirt. Morrison climbed down from the wagon slowly, his gaze sweeping from the house to the barn to the fields beyond. "You Mercer?" he asked. "Yes, sir. This is my wife, Evelyn." Morrison tipped his hat to her. "Ma'am, you wrote the letter?" "I did." Good letter. Smart points about transport access. He turned back to Caleb. Show me the pasture. They walked the North Range together, Morrison asking questions that Caleb answered as honestly as he could. Grass quality, water source reliability, disease history, predator problems. The man was thorough, testing fence posts by shaking them, bending down to examine the soil, even tasting the creek water. After an hour, they returned to the yard. Morrison stood silent for a long moment, making calculations Caleb couldn't read. Your fence needs work in the northwest corner, he said finally. I can fix that by Monday, Caleb replied. The water's good, grass is adequate. Better than adequate, actually. Morrison looked at Evelyn. You said 50 cents per head. Yes. I'll give you 40. We'll take 45, Evelyn countered immediately. We're saving you transport costs and time. That's worth the extra nickel. Morrison's eyebrows rose. He looked at Caleb. Your wife handles negotiations? She handles most things, Caleb said. The rancher smiled for the first time. Smart man. He turned to Evelyn. 45 it is. I'll bring 50 head next week. Contract runs through September. He held out his hand. Evelyn shook it firmly. After Morrison left, Caleb did the math. 50 head at 45 cents for 2 months meant $45. More than enough for the bank payment with money left over. They'd done it. He turned to Evelyn, who was watching the wagon disappear down the road, her expression unreadable. You saved the ranch, he said. We saved it. She looked at him. Together. The word hung between them, meaning everything. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the past 2 months, about how Evelyn had taken his desperate situation and turned it into something with a future, about how she'd transformed chaos into order, waste into efficiency, failure into survival, about how somewhere in all of that, she'd become more than a practical arrangement. He got up and walked to her door, stood there in the dark hallway, hand raised to knock, trying to figure out what he'd even say. The door opened before he could decide. Evelyn stood there in her nightdress, hair loose around her shoulders, looking at him with those sharp eyes that saw too much. Can't sleep either? She asked. No. Come on. She stepped back, letting him into her room. It felt transgressive, wrong, crossing that threshold. But she'd invited him and he went. They sat on the edge of her bed in the darkness, shoulders almost touching. I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't answered the advertisement, Caleb said quietly. If I'd married someone else. Or no one. You would have figured something out. No, I wouldn't have. He turned to look at her profile in the moonlight from the window. I was drowning, and I didn't even know it. Just kept working harder, thinking effort would fix everything. You saw what I couldn't see. That's not special. That's just perspective. It's more than that. He took a breath. Evelyn, I need to tell you something. Don't. What? Don't say something just because you're grateful. Her voice was tight. I came here for practical reasons. You married me for practical reasons. That's the agreement. Let's not complicate it with feelings that'll fade when things get hard again. What if they won't fade? She went very still. What if this isn't about gratitude? He continued. What if somewhere between fixing the books and fighting through that storm and watching you negotiate with Morrison like you were born to it, what if I realized I don't want this to be practical anymore? Caleb, I know what we said. I know the rules we set. But damn it, Evelyn, I'm trying to tell you that She kissed him. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was fierce, almost angry, her hands gripping his shirt like she was afraid he'd disappear. He responded without thinking, pulling her closer, tangling his fingers in her hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. This is a terrible idea, she whispered. Probably. It'll make everything more complicated. I don't care. You should. But she was kissing him again, softer this time, and he was lost. They fell back onto the bed together, two people who'd started as strangers, became partners, and were now fumbling their way towards something neither of them knew how to name. Later, when they lay tangled together in the dark, Evelyn traced patterns on his chest with one finger. This doesn't change anything, she said quietly. What? The ranch, the work. We still have everything ahead of us. I know. And we'll probably fight. I'm difficult, remember? You're determined. There's a difference. She smiled against his shoulder. You keep saying that. Because it's true. They lay in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds outside. An owl calling, wind in the grass, the familiar creak of the old house settling. Caleb? Evelyn said eventually. Yeah. That lawyer's clerk who called me managing? What about him? I think he would have hated seeing me negotiate with Morrison. Caleb tightened his arm around her. His loss. Definitely. She yawned, burrowing closer. We should sleep. Morrison's cattle arrive Monday, and we still need to fix that northwest fence. Always practical, always thinking ahead. It made him smile. Evelyn? I'm glad you answered the advertisement. She was quiet for a moment, then, so am I. They fell asleep like that, two people who'd married for survival and found something neither of them had been looking for. Outside, the stars wheeled across the Montana sky, indifferent to human struggles and small victories. But inside the ranch house that had stood for 3 generations, something new was being built, something that might actually last. Morning came too soon and too bright. Caleb woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Evelyn moving around the kitchen. For a moment, lying in her bed with sunlight streaming through the window, he let himself feel something close to contentment. Then reality crashed back. Morrison's cattle were coming Monday. The fence still needed fixing, and they'd crossed a line last night that couldn't be uncrossed. He found his shirt and pulled it on, trying to smooth out the wrinkles. When he walked into the kitchen, Evelyn was already dressed, her hair pulled back in its usual severe knot, pouring coffee like nothing had changed. Morning, she said without looking at him. Morning. She handed him a cup. Their fingers brushed and she pulled back quickly, turning to the stove where eggs were frying. We should get started on that fence early, she said, before the heat gets bad. Evelyn, I made extra biscuits. You'll need the energy. He recognized the wall going up, the same one she'd had when she stepped off the train 2 months ago. Practical. Controlled. Safe. Are we not going to talk about last night? What's there to talk about? She flipped the eggs with more force than necessary. We're adults. We're married. These things happen. These things. He set his coffee down. Is that what you're calling it? What would you call it? I don't know. But it felt like more than just things happening. She finally looked at him, her expression unreadable. Don't make it complicated, Caleb. We have a good partnership. Let's not ruin it by what? By admitting we might actually care about each other. By expecting more than we can deliver. Her voice was sharp now. I've been through this before. Feelings get confused with convenience. Gratitude gets mistaken for something deeper. And then when the crisis passes, you realize you were just 2 people clinging to each other in a storm. That's not what this is. You don't know that. Neither do I. She plated the eggs with shaking hands. Let's just focus on the ranch. On making it work. That's what we're both here for. He wanted to argue, wanted to push back against the fear he could hear underneath her words. But he also understood it. They'd both been alone for so long that trust felt more dangerous than isolation. Fine, he said quietly. We'll focus on the ranch. Something flickered in her eyes. Relief, maybe. Or disappointment. They ate breakfast in silence and went to work. The northwest fence took all day to repair. Caleb worked with grim determination, replacing rotted posts and restringing wire, while Evelyn handed him tools and made notes about other sections that would need attention soon. They barely spoke except to coordinate the work. By evening, they were both exhausted and sunburned. The fence was solid. Morrison would have no complaints. That night, they retreated to separate rooms. Caleb lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he'd imagined the way she'd kissed him. The way she'd held on to him like he was the only solid thing in her world. Morrison's cattle arrived Monday morning with the sunrise, 50 head of prime beef cattle, driven by 3 of Morrison's ranch hands who looked at Caleb's operation with barely concealed amusement. The foreman, a scarred man named Dutch, walked the fence line with Caleb and gave a grudging nod. It'll hold, he said, but you'll need to check it daily. Cattle find weaknesses. I know. Morrison said your wife negotiated the rate. Dutch spat tobacco juice into the dust. That true? Yes. Huh. He studied Caleb for a moment. Smart woman. The smartest I know. The cattle settled into the north pasture like they owned it. Caleb watched them graze, thinking about the money they represented, the bank payment they'd make, the breathing room they'd bought. He found Evelyn in her office, updating the ledgers with the new income. "We can make the payment," she said without looking up, "with $14 left over." "That's good?" "It's better than good. It's survival." She closed the ledger with a decisive thump. "And if we're careful, if we manage things right, we might actually turn a profit by winter." "You did this," he said. "All of it." "We did it." But her voice was distant, professional. The days that followed fell into a new rhythm. They worked together efficiently, communicating in the shorthand of people who understood each other's rhythms. But the easy conversations were gone. Evelyn kept herself busy with projects, reorganizing the root cellar, cataloging supplies, planning winter preparations. Caleb threw himself into the endless physical labor of the ranch. At night they ate dinner and discussed business. Then Evelyn would excuse herself early and disappear into her room. The door between them might as well have been made of iron. Caleb told himself it was better this way. Safer. They had a working partnership, and that was more than most married couples could claim. But he missed her. Missed the version of her he'd glimpsed that night when she'd let her guard down. The woman who'd kissed him like she was drowning, and he was air. 3 weeks after Morrison's cattle arrived, the bank payment came due. They rode into town together, the money secured in Evelyn's leather satchel. The bank was a squat brick building that smelled like old paper and broken dreams. The manager, a thin man named Carlyle, looked surprised to see them. "Mr. Mercer, I wasn't expecting you until later in the week." "We have the payment," Evelyn said, setting the satchel on his desk. "In full." Carlyle counted the money slowly, his expression shifting from skepticism to confusion to something that might have been respect. "This is unexpected," he said finally. "I'll be honest, we'd prepared foreclosure paperwork." Caleb felt cold rage rise in his chest. "You were that sure I'd fail?" "The ranch has been struggling for years, Mr. Mercer. It seemed inevitable." Carlyle stamped the payment receipt. "Whatever you're doing differently, keep doing it." Outside, Evelyn walked fast, her jaw tight. "They were ready to take it," she said when they were out of earshot, "before the payment was even late. That's how banks work. It's predatory." She stopped in the middle of the boardwalk. "They sit back and wait for people to fail so they can seize assets. It's disgusting." "We didn't fail." "No, we didn't." She looked at him, and for a moment the wall between them thinned. "We beat them." "You beat them," he corrected. She shook her head. "I couldn't have done any of it without you. The fence repairs, the cattle deal, all of it." "You think Morrison would have leased to someone who couldn't handle the work? He was betting on both of us." They stood there on the street, the summer sun beating down, people passing around them. "Evelyn, we should celebrate," she interrupted. "Something small, maybe dinner at the hotel restaurant?" It was an olive branch, a small one, but offered freely. "I'd like that," Caleb said. The hotel restaurant was the nicest place in Red Hollow, which wasn't saying much. Checkered tablecloths and candles stuck in bottles. But it felt special anyway, sitting across from Evelyn in the dim light while she studied the menu like it was a legal document. "I haven't eaten in a restaurant in 2 years," she admitted. "I'm not sure what to order." "Get whatever you want. We earned it." She ordered the roast chicken. He got beef stew. They shared a bottle of wine that was probably terrible but tasted like victory. "Do you remember what you wrote in that first letter?" Caleb asked halfway through the meal. "Which part?" "The part about wanting a purpose. Work that matters." "I remember." She took a sip of wine. "Why?" "Do you feel like you found it? Here, I mean." She was quiet for a long moment, twirling her fork through her potatoes. "I don't know if I found it or built it. Maybe both. The ranch was dying when I arrived. Now it's not. That feels like it matters." "It does matter. You matter." The words came out more intense than he intended. Her gaze snapped to his. "Don't." "Don't what?" "Don't look at me like that. Like I'm something more than what I am." "What are you then?" "Practical? Useful? Good with numbers?" Her voice hardened. "Not someone you build dreams around." "Who told you that?" "Experience." She set her fork down. "Every time I've let myself believe someone saw more in me than utility, I've been wrong. I'm tired of being wrong." I'm not him, Caleb said quietly. That lawyer's clerk who called you managing. I'm not your father's wife who made you feel unwanted. I'm not the school board in St. Louis. I know that. Do you? He leaned forward. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're so afraid of being hurt again that you won't even let yourself see what's right in front of you. And what's that? Someone who's falling in love with you. The words landed like a stone in still water. Evelyn went very pale. You can't say things like that. Why not? It's true. You don't know what you're saying. You're grateful. You're relieved we made the payment. You're confusing. Stop telling me what I'm feeling. His voice was rough now. I know the difference between gratitude and this. I know what it's like to want someone in a way that has nothing to do with ledgers and fence posts. Caleb, I wake up thinking about you. I go to sleep listening for you moving around in the next room. I watch you work and I think about how strong you are, how smart, how you never quit even when everything's against you. He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. That's not gratitude. That's love. She stared at their joined hands like they were something foreign. I can't do this, she whispered. Can't or won't. Both. She pulled her hand back. I came here for safety, for structure, for something I could control. Love isn't any of those things. No, it's not. He sat back. But maybe that's the point. She stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over her wine glass. I need air. She left before he could stop her, disappearing through the restaurant door into the night. Caleb sat there alone, watching the candle burn down, wondering if he'd just destroyed the one good thing in his life by wanting more. He found her outside, leaning against the hitching post, staring up at the stars. I'm sorry, he said. I shouldn't have pushed. No, you should have. She didn't look at him. Because you're right. I am afraid. Terrified, actually. Of what? Of this working, of it being real. Her voice cracked. Because if I let myself believe in it, if I let myself love you back and then it falls apart, I don't think I'd survive it. It won't fall apart. You can't promise that. No, he admitted. I can't, but I can promise I'll fight for it, for us, every single day. She finally turned to look at him. Tears streaked her face, catching the lamplight from the street. What if I'm not enough? What if you wake up one day and realize you married me for the ranch, and you're stuck with someone you don't even like? That's not going to happen. How do you know? Because I already know you. He stepped closer. I know you hum when you think no one's listening. I know you check the chicken coop twice every night because you worry about foxes. I know you pretend you don't care what the townspeople say, but it hurts you anyway. I know you're afraid of failing, but you do hard things anyway. He touched her face gently. I know you, Evelyn, and I'm not going anywhere. She closed her eyes, leaning into his hand. This is terrifying. I know. I don't know how to do this. How to be loved. Neither do I. We'll figure it out together. She opened her eyes. What if I'm bad at it? Then you'll be bad at it. I don't care. He smiled. You can't be good at everything. That surprised a laugh out of her, wet and shaky. I hate not being good at things. I know, it's very annoying. She laughed again, and then she was crying, and then she was kissing him in the middle of the street while the whole town probably watched from behind their curtains. They rode home through the darkness, her arms wrapped around his waist, her cheek pressed against his back. The ranch appeared over the hill, small and imperfect, but theirs. Inside, they didn't talk. There were no more words that needed saying. They went to bed together, not as strangers or partners, or even as a practical arrangement, but as two people who'd finally stopped running from what they'd found. Later, wrapped in sheets that smelled like soap and sunlight, Evelyn traced the scar on Caleb's shoulder from a childhood accident he'd told her about weeks ago. I need to tell you something, she said quietly. What? The will, your father's will with the marriage clause. He went still. What about it? It's cruel, manipulative, trying to control you from beyond the grave. She propped herself up on one elbow. But I'm glad it existed. Why? Because I never would have come here otherwise, never would have known this was possible. She kissed his shoulder. So I'm grateful to your bastard father for being a controlling old man. Caleb laughed, surprised. That's one way to look at it. It's the truth. She settled back against him. Although if we ever have children, we're not putting conditions in our wills. Deal. He paused. Did you just say when we have children? If? I said if. You said when. Did I? She yawned, deliberately casual. Must have been a slip of the tongue. He pulled her closer, grinning in the darkness. They fell asleep like that, two people who'd built something real out of desperation and honesty. The next weeks were different, better. They still worked hard, still fought against the land and the weather and the endless demands of the ranch. But now there was lightness too. Stolen kisses in the barn, her hand finding his across the dinner table, the easy comfort of falling asleep together and waking up the same way. The town noticed. Mrs. Henderson made pointed comments about newlyweds whenever Evelyn came into the store. Reverend Michaels offered unsolicited marriage advice with whiskey breath. Tom Henley cackled and told Caleb he'd gotten himself a live one. Evelyn handled it with the same calm efficiency she handled everything else. But Caleb could see it wearing on her. The judgment, the gossip, the way people still looked at their marriage like something suspect. It came to a head in late August. They were in town buying supplies when Evelyn went into the post office while Caleb loaded the wagon. He was securing the last crate when he heard raised voices from inside. He found Evelyn standing very still in front of the postal clerk, a letter clutched in her hand. Two women stood nearby, Mrs. Henderson and the banker Carlyle's wife, both with expressions of false sympathy. "I'm just saying, dear, that mail-order marriages rarely last," Mrs. Carlyle was saying. "The novelty wears off. And then what are you left with? A stranger you're legally bound to." "My marriage is none of your concern," Evelyn said quietly. "We're not trying to be cruel," Mrs. Henderson added with poisonous sweetness. "We just worry. A woman of your education tied to a failing ranch and a man who could barely manage it before you arrived. It seems such a waste." "The ranch isn't failing. For now. But what happens when Morrison's cattle leave? When winter comes and you're trapped out there with nothing but debt and disappointment?" Mrs. Henderson leaned in. "There's no shame in admitting you made a mistake. You could still leave, start over somewhere else." Caleb stepped forward. "That's enough." All three women turned. Mrs. Henderson had the grace to look embarrassed. Mrs. Carlyle just smiled. "Mr. Mercer, we were just expressing concern for your wife's well-being." "My wife doesn't need your concern." He moved to stand beside Evelyn. "And our marriage is working just fine." "Of course it is," Mrs. Carlyle said, "until the next crisis or the one after that. Then we'll handle it." Evelyn's voice was steel now. "The same way we've handled everything else, together." "How noble." Mrs. Henderson's smile was all teeth. "Let's see if you're still saying that in 6 months." They left before Caleb could say something he'd regret. Evelyn was silent the entire ride home, the letter still clutched in her hand. "What was the letter?" he asked finally. "From the school board in St. Louis, offering me my old position back." She stared at it. "They said they'd made a mistake letting me go, that they need someone with my skills." Something cold settled in Caleb's stomach. "When did you write to them?" "I didn't. They wrote to me." She looked at him. "You really think I'd go behind your back like that?" "No, I just—" He gripped the reins tighter. "Would you want to go back? To St. Louis? To teaching children whose parents complained I was too strict?" She laughed bitterly. "Why would I want that?" "It's safe, stable. You'd have your own money, your own life." "I have my own life here." "Do you? Or do you have my life that you're managing?" She went very quiet. "Is that what you think this is?" "I don't know what to think when women in town tell you you're wasting yourself, and part of me wonders if they're right." "Stop the wagon." "Evelyn, stop the wagon, Caleb." He pulled the horses to a halt. Evelyn climbed down and started walking, her back rigid with anger. Caleb cursed and went after her. "Where are you going?" "Away from you before I say something I'll regret." "Too late." "Say it." He caught her arm. "Say whatever you're thinking." She whirled on him. "You want to know what I'm thinking? I'm thinking that after everything, after the work we've done, after I saved your ranch, after I let myself fall in love with you, you still don't trust that I want to be here." "That's not—" "Yes, it is." Her eyes blazed. "The second those women plant doubt, you immediately assume I'm looking for an escape. like I'm just biding my time until something better comes along. I saw how they looked at you, how they made you feel small. You deserve better than that. I deserve a husband who believes in me, her voice broke, who doesn't question my choices every time someone else does. The words hit him like a fist. You're right. What? You're right. I'm sorry. He ran his hand through his hair, frustrated with himself. I keep waiting for you to realize you made a mistake, that you could do better than a ranch that's barely surviving and a man who doesn't know how to say what he feels without messing it up. You think this is easy for me? She stepped closer. You think I'm not terrified every single day that I've bet everything on something that might fall apart? But I'm here, Caleb. I chose this. I chose you. When are you going to believe that? I want to. Then do it. She grabbed his shirt. Stop waiting for me to leave and trust that I'm staying. He looked down at her, this fierce, brilliant woman who'd answered a desperate advertisement and somehow became the center of his entire world. I trust you, he said. I'm sorry I made you doubt that. Don't do it again. I won't. You will, she said, but her voice had softened. We both will. We'll doubt and fear and probably fight about stupid things, but we have to keep choosing each other anyway. I choose you. He pulled her close. Every day. Even when I'm scared. Even when I don't deserve you. You deserve me, she said against his chest. And I deserve you, broken parts and all. They stood there on the empty road while the sun beat down and the wind carried the smell of sage and dust. Finally, Evelyn pulled back. I need to do something about that letter, she said. What? This. She tore it in half, then in half again, and again, until it was confetti in her hands. She threw the pieces into the wind and watched them scatter across the prairie. There, decision made. Caleb felt something in his chest unlock. You didn't even read the whole thing. Didn't need to. My answer was always no. She started walking back to the wagon. Now come on, we have work to do. Yes, ma'am. And Caleb? Yeah? Next time someone tells me I'm wasting myself on you, I'm going to punch them. He laughed. Please don't. We can't afford bail money. Fine, but I'll want to. They drove home together, the torn letter scattered behind them like shed skin. That night, lying in bed with Evelyn's head on his shoulder, Caleb thought about the will that had started everything. His father's last manipulation, designed to force him into exactly this situation. What are you thinking about? Evelyn asked sleepily. My father, how he'd probably hate that this actually worked. Why? Because I think he wanted me to fail, to prove I wasn't good enough to keep the ranch. Caleb stared at the ceiling. Finding you making this work? It's not what he intended. Good, she yawned. Then we win twice. We save the ranch and prove him wrong. We already did that. No, we're still doing it, every day. She pressed a kiss to his chest, and we'll keep doing it until the ranch thrives and everyone who doubted us has to eat their words. That's a long-term plan. I'm good at those. He smiled in the darkness. Yes, you are. Caleb? I love you, even when you're being an idiot. I love you too, even when you're being bossy. I'm not bossy. I'm decisive. Whatever you say, boss. She pinched him and he laughed, and they fell asleep trading insults that sounded like endearments. The ranch didn't magically become prosperous overnight. The work was still brutal. The money was still tight. Morrison's cattle would leave in September and they'd have to find other income. But they faced it together now, without walls between them. And that made all the difference. September came with the first hint of autumn in the air. The mornings turned crisp enough that Evelyn started wearing Caleb's old work jacket over her dress when she went to check the chickens. He pretended not to notice how much he liked seeing her in it, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows, the hem hitting her mid-thigh. Morrison's foreman Dutch arrived on the first Tuesday of the month to collect the cattle. He counted heads, checked them over for injury or illness, and handed Caleb the final payment. They look good, Dutch said grudgingly. Better than when we brought them. The grass is quality, Caleb replied. Morrison wants to know if you'd be interested in the same arrangement next summer. Maybe more head. Caleb glanced at Evelyn, who'd come out to watch the cattle being loaded. She gave him a slight nod. Tell Morrison we're interested. Have him send terms. After Dutch left with the herd trailing dust behind them, the north pasture looked empty and strange. Caleb stood at the fence, watching the last of them disappear over the ridge. "We made it through," Evelyn said, coming to stand beside him. "We actually made it through." "Thanks to you." "Thanks to us." She leaned against the fence rail. "But we can't rely on cattle leasing forever. We need something more sustainable." "I know. I've been thinking about that." "And? What if we bought our own cattle, started small, maybe 10 head, build up the herd over time?" She considered this. That's a long-term investment. It'd take years to turn real profit. "I know, but it's stable, and Morrison proved there's a market." He turned to look at her. "Unless you think it's too risky." "Everything's risky." She smiled. "But at least this is a risk we'd control." They spent the evening running numbers, figuring out how much they could afford to spend on starter cattle without depleting their emergency fund. Evelyn's calculations filled 3 pages of her ledger, every scenario mapped out with her usual precision. "We could do it," she said finally, "if we're careful, if nothing goes catastrophically wrong." "When has that ever been a problem?" Caleb said dryly. She threw a wadded paper at him. The next morning, Caleb rode into town to talk to cattle dealers, while Evelyn stayed behind to work on winter preparations. He found a rancher in Copper Creek willing to sell 10 yearling heifers at a fair price. They shook on the deal, and Caleb arranged for delivery in 2 weeks. He was halfway home when he saw smoke. Not the normal smoke from chimney fires. This was thick and black, rising from somewhere near his property line. His heart kicked into panic, and he spurred the horse faster. The fire was in the southeast corner, where old deadfall had piled up near the fence. Flames ate through dry wood and jumped to the grass, spreading fast in the wind. Caleb could see Evelyn already there with buckets, trying to beat back the flames with a wet blanket. He jumped off the horse and ran to help. The heat hit him like a wall. "When did this start?" he shouted over the roar. 10 minutes ago. I don't know how." She coughed, smoke in her lungs. "It's moving toward the house." They worked frantically, hauling water from the creek, beating at flames that seemed to multiply faster than they could kill them. Caleb's hands blistered. Evelyn's face was black with soot. The wind kept pushing the fire closer to the buildings. "We need help," Caleb said. "I'll ride to the neighbors." "There's no time." Evelyn pointed. The fire had reached the old storage shed, the one filled with rusted tools and rotted lumber. Flames climbed the walls. The shed was only 50 yards from the house. "We have to make a fire break," she said. "Clear everything between the shed and the house." They ran, started pulling up dry grass and brush with their bare hands, creating a strip of dirt between the approaching flames and everything they'd built. Caleb's lungs burned. His vision swam with heat and exhaustion. The shed went up like kindling, collapsing in on itself with a sound like breaking bones. Sparks flew toward the house, and Caleb's heart stopped. Then the wind shifted. Just slightly, but enough. The fire turned on itself, burning back toward the already scorched ground. Without fresh fuel, it began to die. They kept working, making sure every ember was drowned, every hot spot extinguished. By the time they were certain it was out, the sun was setting, and they were both shaking with exhaustion. Caleb looked at the damage. The shed was gone. 20 yards of fence line destroyed. An acre of pasture scorched black. It could have been so much worse. "The house is safe," Evelyn said hoarsely. "That's what matters." "How did it start?" "I don't know. I was in the garden and I saw smoke. By the time I got there, it was already spreading." They walked back to the house in silence, too tired for words. Inside, Evelyn pumped water so they could wash the soot from their skin. Caleb's hands were raw and bleeding. She bandaged them without speaking, her own hands shaking. "That was close," he said finally. "Too close." She sat down heavily at the table. "We could have lost everything. But we didn't. This time." She looked at him, fear naked in her eyes. "What about next time? We can't control weather or fire or drought or any of the 100 things that could destroy this place. No one can control those things. You just deal with them." "By almost dying?" Her voice rose. "By working ourselves to exhaustion and hoping we get lucky? What else is there?" "I don't know." She stood up, pacing. "I thought I could manage this. I thought if I just planned well enough, worked hard enough, we'd be safe. But we're not safe." We're one disaster away from losing it all. Caleb watched her unravel. This woman who always had answers, always had plans. She looked lost in a way he'd never seen before. Evelyn, maybe those women in town were right. Maybe this is a waste. Maybe I'm trying to make something work that's fundamentally broken. Stop. He stood and caught her shoulders. You're scared. I get it. I'm scared too. But don't do this. Don't convince yourself it's not worth fighting for just because it's hard. It's not just hard, Caleb. It's impossible sometimes. So was finding you. So was making the bank payment. So was getting Morrison to lease our pasture. He gentled his grip. We keep doing impossible things. Why stop now? She closed her eyes. I'm tired. I know. I'm tired of fighting, tired of being strong, tired of having all the answers. Then don't have them. Let me carry some of this. He pulled her close. You don't have to hold everything together by yourself. She sagged against him, finally letting herself break. What if I can't do this? Then we can't do it. Together. He kissed her hair. But I think you can. I think we can. They stood there in the soot-stained kitchen while night fell outside. Eventually, Evelyn pulled back and wiped her eyes. I'm sorry, she said, for falling apart. Don't be. You're allowed to fall apart sometimes. I don't like it. I know, very inconvenient. He smiled. But I still love you. Even when I'm being weak, you're not weak. You're human. He touched her face. There's a difference. She leaned into his hand. We need to rebuild that fence. Tomorrow. Tonight we rest. The shed can wait. Caleb, Evelyn. He said it firmly. We almost lost everything today. Right now I just want to hold my wife and be grateful we're both alive. The rest can wait until morning. She nodded slowly. Okay. They ate cold leftovers for dinner, too tired to cook. Then they went to bed and held each other in the darkness, listening to the house settle around them. I was so scared, Evelyn whispered. When I saw the fire heading for the house, I thought about losing this place and I couldn't breathe. I know. Not because of the money or the work, because this is ours. We built this together. We'll keep building it, as long as we can. She was quiet for a moment. What happens when we can't anymore? Then we'll figure something else out. But I don't think we're there yet. You're more optimistic than I am. One of us has to be. He kissed her forehead. Balance. She smiled against his chest. I suppose that's what makes us work. That and your excellent bookkeeping skills. And your ability to fix fences. And your negotiating. And your stubbornness. That's a shared trait, he said. True. She yawned. We're both impossibly stubborn. Lucky for us. They fell asleep like that. Two stubborn people who refused to give up on each other or the life they were building. The next weeks were spent repairing fire damage and preparing for winter. Caleb rebuilt the fence line and cleared the debris from where the shed had stood. Evelyn preserved the last of the garden harvest and started stockpiling supplies. The yearling heifers arrived and settled into the north pasture, looking small and vulnerable. They're scrawny, Caleb said, watching them graze. They're young. They'll grow. Evelyn made notes in her breeding book. If we're smart about it, we'll have calves next year. Then we can start building the herd properly. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, but it's possible. She looked at him. That's becoming our motto, isn't it? Could be worse mottos. October brought the first frost. Caleb woke one morning to find ice crystals on the window, and Evelyn burrowed against him for warmth. It's cold, she mumbled. Winter's coming. I hate winter. You've never spent winter on a ranch, he pointed out. I spent winters in St. Louis. That was bad enough. This'll be worse. Harder work, longer days, and we're isolated out here. She opened one eye. Are you trying to scare me? I'm trying to prepare you. I don't scare easy anymore. She sat up, wrapping the blanket around herself. Besides, I have you. That makes it bearable. Just bearable? Almost pleasant, she amended. I'll take it. She was right about winter being hard. The cold settled in deep and mean, turning the ground iron hard and the water in the troughs to ice every morning. They burned through firewood faster than Caleb had stockpiled. The cattle needed constant tending. The chickens stopped laying. But there were good parts too. Long evenings by the fire with Evelyn reading aloud from books she'd brought from St. Louis, teaching her to play cards and learning she was ruthlessly competitive, making love under heavy quilts while snow piled against the windows. The quiet intimacy of being snowbound together with nowhere else to be. One night in late November, they sat by the fire after dinner. Evelyn had been quiet all day, distracted in a way that made Caleb nervous. "What's wrong?" he asked finally. "Nothing's wrong." "You've been chewing your thumbnail. You only do that when you're worried." She looked at her hand like it had betrayed her. "I'm not worried exactly." "Then what?" She set down the book she'd been pretending to read. "I'm late." "Late for what?" "My monthly courses. I'm late." It took him a moment to understand. When he did, his heart stuttered. "How late?" 3 weeks. Almost 4. She met his eyes. "I think I might be pregnant." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Not certain, but I'm never late, and I've been feeling strange, tired, nauseous in the mornings." Caleb tried to process this. A baby. Their baby. "How do you feel about it?" "I don't know. Terrified? Excited? Both?" She laughed shakily. "We can barely keep ourselves alive out here. How are we supposed to raise a child?" "The same way people always have, I guess." "That's not very reassuring." "I know." He moved to sit beside her, taking her hand. "But we'll figure it out, like everything else." "A baby changes everything, Caleb. The risk, the work, the money we'll need. I can't—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "I won't be able to work as hard. Not when I'm further along. And after the baby comes, then I'll work harder. We'll adapt. You can't do it all yourself. I won't be by myself. I'll have you. You'll just be doing different work." He squeezed her hand. "We'll manage." "You keep saying that." "Because it's true. Because we always do." He hesitated. "Unless you don't want this. If you're not ready." "No, I want it." She said it quickly, almost fiercely. "I'm scared out of my mind, but I want it. I want a family with you." Relief flooded through him. "Then we'll make it work." "Just like that?" "Just like that." She leaned against him, both of them staring into the fire. "My mother died when I was 9, she said quietly. "I barely remember her. I don't know how to be a mother. I barely remember mine either. We'll have to figure it out as we go." "That's a terrible plan." "It's the only one we've got." He kissed her temple. "But I've seen you handle every challenge this ranch has thrown at you. I'm not worried about your ability to handle a baby. Babies don't respond to spreadsheets and efficiency plans." "No, but they respond to love, and we've got plenty of that." She turned to look at him, eyes bright with unshed tears. "When did you become the optimistic one?" "When I married someone who needed me to be." She kissed him then, soft and sweet, and they sat together planning for a future that had suddenly become more real and more terrifying than anything they'd faced before. Winter deepened. Evelyn's pregnancy became certain, confirmed by the traveling doctor who came through Red Hollow once a month. She was due in early June, he said. "Keep healthy, don't overwork, rest when tired." Evelyn ignored most of his advice. She kept working the same brutal hours, managing the books, tending the chickens, helping Caleb with ranch work. He tried to stop her, tried to make her rest, but she was as stubborn as ever. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she said when he objected to her hauling water. "I can still work." "You shouldn't have to work this hard." "Neither should you, but here we are." It became a constant argument between them. Caleb worried. Evelyn insisted she was fine. They fought about it more than they fought about anything else. The breaking point came in January. Caleb found her in the barn, trying to move a heavy feed sack by herself. She was 4 months pregnant now, just starting to show, and she looked exhausted. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "What does it look like?" "It looks like you're trying to hurt yourself." He took the sack from her. "I told you I'd handle the feed." "You were busy with the fence." "The fence can wait. You can't." He set the sack down too hard, anger and fear making him rough. "You need to stop this." "Stop what? Working? We both work. That's how this place survives." "Not if it costs you the baby." She went very still. "What did you say?" "You heard me. You're pushing too hard. Something's going to give." "So I'm supposed to just sit in the house and do nothing, Be useless? You're not useless. You're pregnant. There's a difference. Is there? Because it feels like you think I'm broken now, like I can't be trusted to know my own limits. That's not... He stopped, frustrated. I'm scared, Evelyn. I'm scared you'll hurt yourself trying to prove you're still strong enough to do everything. I am strong enough. I know you are, but you don't have to prove it. Not to me. She looked at him for a long moment. Then her face crumpled. I don't know how to be anything but useful. If I'm not working, if I'm not solving problems, then what am I? You're my wife, the mother of my child, the person I love more than anything. He pulled her close carefully. That's enough. That's more than enough. She cried against his chest, harsh sobs that shook her whole body. I'm scared I'll be a terrible mother, that I'll fail at this the way I failed at everything else. You haven't failed at anything. I lost my teaching job. I drove away everyone who ever tried to love me. I'm difficult in managing and... Stop. He made her look at him. You didn't lose your teaching job. You outgrew it. You didn't drive people away. They weren't strong enough to handle someone as capable as you, and you're not difficult. You're extraordinary. You're biased. Damn right I am. I'm biased toward the woman who saved my ranch and my life and made me believe in things I'd given up on. He wiped tears from her face. You're going to be an amazing mother because you care too much to be anything else. What if I don't know how? Then we'll learn together. Make mistakes together. Figure it out as we go. He rested his hand on her stomach. This kid's lucky to have you. She covered his hand with hers. We're having a baby. Yeah, we are. That's insane. Completely. He smiled. But so is everything else we've done. She laughed through her tears. True. They stood there in the cold barn, holding each other and their impossible future, while outside the Montana winter raged on. As winter began to ease toward spring, they made plans. Caleb started building a cradle from scrap wood, working on it at night by lamplight. Evelyn sewed baby clothes from fabric she'd been saving, tiny garments that looked impossibly small. The ranch demanded constant attention, but they were managing. Barely. The heifers were healthy and showing signs they'd calve in spring. The books balanced with almost nothing to spare. They were surviving. One evening in March, Evelyn sat at the table sorting through the old trunk she'd brought from St. Louis. She pulled out letters, photographs, small mementos from a life that seemed like it belonged to someone else. What are you doing? Caleb asked. Clearing space. The baby will need somewhere to keep things eventually. She held up a photograph. This was me at 20, teaching in Springfield. Caleb took it. The woman in the photo looked severe, unsmiling, like she was braced for disappointment. You look different now, he said. Older. Happier. She considered this. I am happier. I didn't realize how unhappy I was until I wasn't anymore. Any regrets about answering the advertisement? Not a single one. She took the photograph back. Even on the worst days when everything's falling apart and I'm exhausted and scared, I don't regret it. This is the life I chose. You're the life I chose. Even though it's hard? Especially because it's hard. She set the photograph aside. Easy things don't mean anything. This means everything. Caleb pulled her close, feeling the swell of her stomach against him, this tangible proof of their future. I love you, he said. I know, you tell me every day. I'll keep telling you until you're sick of hearing it. That'll never happen. She kissed him. But you can keep trying. Outside, the last snows of winter melted into mud. The world prepared to wake up and start again. Inside the ranch house that had seen so much struggle and survival, two people held each other and waited for spring. Spring arrived tentatively, like it wasn't sure it was welcome. The snow melted into streams that carved new paths through the mud. Green shoots appeared in the pasture where everything had been dead and brown for months. The heifers grew fat with pregnancy, their sides swelling just like Evelyn's. She was 6 months along now and moved with the careful deliberation of someone carrying something precious. Caleb watched her constantly, unable to help himself. She'd catch him staring and roll her eyes. I'm not going to break, she said one morning, finding him watching her collect eggs. I know. Then stop hovering. Can't help it. You're carrying my kid. Our kid. And hovering doesn't make pregnancy safer. It just makes me irritable. He tried to give her space. Failed consistently. She tolerated it with the patience of someone who'd learned to pick her battles. The first heifer calved in early April. Caleb found her in the north pasture at dawn, a wet newborn struggling to stand on stick legs while the mother licked it clean. He ran to get Evelyn, forgetting she shouldn't be running anywhere in her condition. She came anyway, breathless and laughing at his excitement. "Look," he said, pointing. "First calf." The little thing finally stood, wobbling but upright, and immediately started nursing. Evelyn leaned against the fence, one hand on her swollen stomach. "We did that," she said softly. "We built something that makes more of itself." That's one way to put it. It's the truth. She looked at him. A year ago, this ranch was dying. Now it's growing, creating new life. Over the next weeks, 5 more calves arrived. All healthy, all strong. The herd was expanding. It would be years before they could sell beef for real profit, but the foundation was there. Something sustainable they'd built together. Morrison sent a letter in late April confirming he wanted to lease pasture again, this time for 70 head. The rate was the same, but the volume meant significantly more income. Evelyn updated the projections in her ledger with visible satisfaction. "We'll be comfortable this year," she said. "Not wealthy, but comfortable. We can build a real emergency fund, maybe even hire seasonal help." "You're already thinking ahead." "Someone has to." She shifted in her chair, trying to find a comfortable position. "This baby's running out of room. Want me to rub your back?" "Always." He worked his thumbs along her spine while she made notes about summer planting. They'd fallen into this rhythm over the months, working together even when the work was just sitting still and planning. "I've been thinking," Evelyn said. "About names." "Yeah?" "If it's a boy, I'd like to name him after your father." Caleb's hands stilled. "Why would you want to do that?" "Because despite everything, despite that cruel will, he gave us each other. In a backwards, manipulative way, he's the reason we found each other." She turned to look at him. "I can acknowledge that without forgiving him for being a bastard." "You want to name our son after a bastard?" "I want to name him after the man who loved this land enough to fight for it, even if his methods were wrong." She touched his face. "You're not him, Caleb. You're better. And maybe our son can be better still. Turn the name into something good." He thought about it. His father, bitter and controlling even in death, but also the man who taught him to work, to endure, to care for land and animals with steady hands. "James," he said finally. That was his middle name. Less baggage. "James Mercer." She tested it. "I like it." "And if it's a girl?" "Sarah, after your mother." His throat tightened. "You barely know anything about her." "I know she raised you. I know she must have been strong to survive out here. I know you still miss her." Evelyn squeezed his hand. "That's enough." They sat together in the fading light, planning for a child who would carry pieces of the past into whatever future they could build. May brought heat that arrived like a slap. Evelyn moved through it slowly, her face flushed, her body heavy with the weight of late pregnancy. The doctor had told them early June, but Caleb could see the strain on her and worried it might come sooner. "I'm fine," she insisted when he suggested she rest more. "Women have been having babies forever. I'm not special." "You're special to me." "That's sweet." Still not resting. She was in the garden when her water broke. Caleb was in the barn checking on a heifer that looked ready to calve when he heard Evelyn call his name. Not panicked, but urgent. He ran. She stood in the garden, hands on her lower back, looking down at the wet patch spreading across her skirt. "I think it's time," she said calmly. "Now?" "That's generally how it works." "But the doctor's not due back until next week." "The baby doesn't know that." She grimaced as a contraction hit. "We need the midwife. Mrs. Paulson, 2 ranches over." Caleb helped her inside and got her settled, then rode like hell to the Paulson ranch. The old woman took one look at his face and grabbed her bag without asking questions. By the time they got back, Evelyn was in their bedroom, breathing through contractions that came faster than Caleb had expected. "How long between them?" Mrs. Paulson asked, rolling up her sleeves. 5 minutes, Evelyn said through gritted teeth. "Maybe less. First baby coming fast, that's unusual." The midwife examined her efficiently. "But not unheard of. You're doing fine, dear." Caleb stood uselessly in the corner while Mrs. Paulson took charge. She sent him for hot water, clean towels, more lamps. He did everything she asked, grateful for tasks that kept his hands busy and his mind from spiraling. Labor was brutal and long despite the fast start. Hours blurred together. Evelyn was strong through most of it, focused and determined, but as night fell, she started to break. "I can't," she gasped during a particularly bad contraction. "I can't do this." "You can," Mrs. Paulson said firmly. "You're almost there." "I'm tired. It hurts." "I know, dear, but the baby's coming whether you're ready or not. Might as well help it along." Caleb moved to the bedside and took Evelyn's hand. She gripped it hard enough to hurt. "You've handled everything this ranch has thrown at you," he said quietly. "You can handle this." "This is different." "I know. But you're still the strongest person I've ever met." "I don't feel strong." "You don't have to feel it to be it." He smoothed sweat-soaked hair from her forehead. "Just keep going. I'm right here." Another contraction hit, and she screamed, the sound tearing through the small house. Caleb felt helpless and terrified and useless. "I can see the head," Mrs. Paulson said. "Next contraction, you push with everything you have." Evelyn pushed. Then again, and again. Caleb lost count. She was sobbing now, exhausted beyond anything he'd ever seen, but she didn't stop, didn't give up. Then suddenly there was a different sound. A thin, angry wail that filled the room. "It's a girl," Mrs. Paulson announced, holding up a tiny, red, furious creature. "Healthy lungs on this one." Evelyn collapsed back against the pillows, crying and laughing at the same time. The midwife cleaned the baby and wrapped her in a blanket, then placed her on Evelyn's chest. The baby stopped crying immediately, settling against her mother's heartbeat like she recognized it. Caleb stared at them both, unable to form words. His wife, his daughter, two people he'd die for without hesitation. "Sarah," Evelyn whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand. "Sarah Mercer." The baby gripped her finger with surprising strength. "She's perfect," Caleb managed. "She's wrinkled and angry," Evelyn said, but she was smiling. "But yes, perfect." Mrs. Paulson finished the necessary work, gave them instructions about feeding and care, and left at dawn with payment Caleb pressed into her hands. She tried to refuse, but he insisted. Alone with their daughter, Caleb and Evelyn sat together on the bed and marveled at what they'd created. "I don't know what I'm doing," Evelyn admitted. "She's so small." "We'll figure it out." That's becoming our answer to everything. It's worked so far. Sarah made a small noise, and they both froze, terrified they'd done something wrong. Then she settled back to sleep, and they breathed again. "A year ago," Evelyn said softly, "I was in St. Louis teaching children I didn't care about and going home to an empty room every night. I thought that was all my life would ever be. And now? Now I have more than I ever imagined wanting." She looked at him. "You gave me that. This. Everything. We gave it to each other." She leaned against him carefully, the baby between them. "I suppose we did." They sat there watching their daughter sleep. Two people who'd started as strangers bound by desperation and built something neither of them had known how to want. The weeks after Sarah's birth were chaos. She demanded feeding every 2 hours, cried for reasons they couldn't decipher, and slept so lightly that walking too heavily would wake her. Evelyn was exhausted and frustrated and determined not to admit she needed help. Caleb tried to shoulder more of the ranch work so she could rest. Tried and failed. There was too much for one person. The cattle needed tending, the garden needed planting. Morrison's herd was arriving in a week. They fought about it more than once. "You can't do everything alone," Evelyn snapped one night after he'd come in past midnight. "What choice do I have? You're busy with the baby. So hire help. We budgeted for it. With what time? I'm barely keeping up now." "Then let some things go." "Like what? The fence that needs repair? The irrigation channels that are clogged? The calves that need marking?" He was too tired to be diplomatic. "Everything's necessary." "Then we're failing, because this isn't sustainable." "I know that." He sat down heavily. "But I don't know how to fix it." Sarah started crying in the next room. Evelyn closed her eyes, gathering patience she didn't have. "I'll get her," Caleb said. "You need sleep." "So do you." "I'm feeding her anyway, just—" She stopped, Start it over. Just admit we need help. Stop trying to be a hero. I'm not trying to be a hero. I'm trying to survive. There's a difference? There should be. She left to tend the baby. Caleb sat alone in the kitchen, feeling the weight of everything pressing down. They'd come so far, built so much, but it still felt like they were one crisis away from losing it all. The next morning, he rode into town and put up a notice at the general store. Seasonal ranch hand wanted, room and board plus wages. He got one response. A boy of 19 named Thomas with more enthusiasm than experience. Caleb hired him anyway. Thomas was green but willing. He learned fast and didn't complain about the long hours or the hard work. With his help, Caleb could breathe again, could come home before dark, could spend time with his wife and daughter instead of collapsing into exhausted sleep. This was a good idea, he admitted to Evelyn one evening. I have those occasionally. She was nursing Sarah, looking less exhausted than she had in weeks. Maybe even regularly. Don't get smug. Too late. He watched them together, mother and daughter, and felt something settle in his chest. They were going to make it. Not easily, not perfectly, but they were going to survive. June turned to July. Morrison's cattle arrived and settled into the north pasture. The payment cleared their remaining debt with the bank. For the first time since his father died, Caleb owned the ranch outright. He told Evelyn over dinner. She set down her fork carefully. We're debt-free? As of today. That's... She laughed, surprised by her own emotion. That's incredible. You did that. Your management, your deals, everything. We did that, she corrected. You and me and more luck than we deserved. Luck had nothing to do with it. Some of it was luck, like you placing that advertisement when you did, like me reading it when I did. She reached across the table for his hand, like us finding each other when we both needed it most. Sarah made a noise from her cradle in the corner, not quite awake, but close. They both turned to look at her, this small person who carried their combined stubbornness and determination. You think she'll want this ranch someday? Evelyn asked. I don't know. She might hate it. She might love it. Either way, it'll be her choice. Caleb squeezed her hand. No conditions, no manipulative wills. Just a ranch that works, that we built from almost nothing. Is that enough? For her, who knows? For us? She smiled. It's everything. August brought a letter from Marcus, the cousin who would have inherited if Caleb had failed to marry. It was short and bitter, congratulating Caleb on meeting the terms while making it clear he felt cheated. Evelyn read it over Caleb's shoulder and snorted. He's angry you succeeded. He expected the ranch to fail, expected me to fail. A lot of people did. She took the letter and threw it in the stove. They were all wrong. Were they? We almost didn't make it. Almost doesn't count. We did make it. We're still here. She looked at him seriously. Stop waiting for permission to feel successful. You earned this. We earned this. He pulled her close, careful of the baby in her arms. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You're just now noticing. My mistake. Yes, it was. She kissed him. Don't let it happen again. Sarah grew, learned to smile, then to laugh, started sleeping longer stretches at night so her parents could sleep too. The ranch found its rhythm. Thomas proved reliable enough that Caleb offered him permanent work. The boy accepted with gratitude that made Caleb feel old. I'm 32, he said to Evelyn. Why do I feel ancient? Because you're a rancher and a father. That ages you faster than regular time. Is that scientific? It's observational, much more reliable. They were sitting on the porch in the evening cool, Sarah asleep on Evelyn's lap. The sun turned the western hills gold and purple. Somewhere in the pasture, a calf bawled for its mother. You ever think about the advertisement? Evelyn asked. Which part? The whole thing. How desperate and strange it was. How we both took this insane gamble. I think about it all the time. Me too. She adjusted Sarah's weight. I think about the woman I was when I answered it. How lonely I was. How convinced I was that managing things was the only value I had. And now? Now I know better. I'm still managing things. I can't help that. But I also know I'm more than that. She looked at him. You taught me that. I didn't teach you anything. You already knew. You just needed someone to see it. Maybe. She was quiet for a moment. I'm glad it was you. Me too. They sat in comfortable silence while the sky darkened and the first stars appeared. Inside the house that had been falling apart a year ago, the cradle Caleb built sat ready for whenever Sarah needed it. In the barn, healthy cattle waited for morning. In the garden, vegetables grew in neat rows that Evelyn had planned with careful precision. It wasn't perfect. The work was still hard. Money was still tight. The land was still harsh and unforgiving, but they'd built something that could weather it, something that grew stronger instead of weaker with each challenge. Caleb, Evelyn said eventually. Yeah? Thank you for being desperate enough to place that advertisement. He laughed. Thank you for being lonely enough to answer it. We're quite a pair. The best pair. Sarah stirred in her sleep but didn't wake. Evelyn stood carefully and carried her inside to put her down properly. Caleb followed, closing the door against the night. In the bedroom, they lay together with Sarah between them, watching her breathe, marveling at the impossible fact of her existence. You think we'll be good parents? Evelyn whispered. I think we'll try our best and make mistakes anyway. That's not very reassuring. It's honest. I suppose it is. She touched Sarah's tiny hand. We'll teach her to be strong, independent, to not take anyone's nonsense. We'll teach her to work hard, to keep her word, to build things that last. And to know when to ask for help, Evelyn added, since neither of us is very good at that. Fair point. They watched their daughter sleep, this small person who carried all their hopes and all their fears in equal measure. She'll be better than us, Caleb said quietly. How do you know? Because she'll have both of us. She'll have your intelligence and determination, my stubbornness and work ethic. She'll have a mother who shows her that women can be strong and capable and still be loved for it, a father who shows her that men can be honest about their feelings without being weak. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. When did you become such a romantic? When I married you. Liar. You were romantic when you wrote "No romance promised" in that advertisement. That was honesty, not romance. It was both. You were offering exactly what you had and hoping someone would see the value in it. She wiped her eyes. I saw it. I still see it. Good, because you're stuck with me now. Legally and emotionally. The worst kind of stuck. She laughed softly, mindful of the sleeping baby. The best kind. September came with cooler nights and the smell of autumn in the air. Morrison's cattle left, taking with them another payment that Evelyn recorded in her ledger with satisfaction. The herd had grown to 16 head with the spring calves. Small still, but growing. Thomas proved his worth by handling the fall harvest almost entirely on his own, while Caleb helped Evelyn with the baby. The garden yielded more than they could use, so they sold the excess in town. Not much profit, but every bit helped. One afternoon, Caleb came in from fixing fence to find Evelyn at her desk, staring at the ledger with an expression he couldn't read. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Look at this. She pointed to the columns of numbers. We made a profit this year, a real profit. How much? $87 after all expenses, including Thomas's wages and building supplies and everything. $87. It wasn't a fortune, but it was proof. Proof they could do more than just survive. Proof they could build something that grew instead of shrinking. We did it, Caleb said, still not quite believing. We did. Evelyn closed the ledger. Your father would hate it. Good. That cruel will he wrote, trying to force you into marriage to prove you were failing, it backfired completely. You found me. We saved the ranch. We're thriving. She smiled. Best revenge possible. I wasn't trying for revenge. I know, but you got it anyway. She stood and wrapped her arms around him. We both did. We got everything we didn't know we needed. He held her close, this woman who'd answered a desperate advertisement and transformed his entire world. I love you, he said. I know. You tell me constantly. I'll keep telling you. Good. Don't stop. Sarah started fussing in her cradle. Evelyn went to pick her up, bouncing her gently until she settled. The baby stared at her parents with serious eyes, like she understood the weight of what they'd built and was already planning how to improve it. She has your expression, Caleb said. Which one? The one that says she's already 3 steps ahead of everyone else. That's not my expression. It absolutely is. Evelyn looked at their daughter and saw it. The same determination, the same refusal to accept failure. Oh no. Oh yes, we're raising a tiny version of you. Heaven help us all. Heaven won't help, we're on our own. He grinned, just like always. Then we'd better be ready. They stood together in the house they'd saved, holding the daughter they'd made, looking at a future they'd built from nothing but desperation and honesty and stubborn refusal to give up. Outside, the ranch stretched across the valley, scarred by fire and drought and years of struggle. But it was still standing, still producing, still growing, like the people who'd fought for it. Winter would come again. There would be more fires, more droughts, more crises they couldn't predict. The work would never stop being hard. The land would never stop being harsh. But they'd face it together. The rancher who'd placed a desperate advertisement and the teacher who'd answered it. Two people who'd married for survival and found something worth more than either of them had imagined. Love that grew in hard soil. Family built from honest words. A future earned through work and sweat and refusing to quit when everything said they should. Caleb looked at his wife and daughter and felt something he'd never thought he'd feel about this ranch. Hope. Not the fragile kind that broke easily, the sturdy kind. The kind built on proof instead of wishes. The kind that said no matter what came next, they'd handle it, together. What are you thinking? Evelyn asked. That I'm glad I was desperate enough to need you. And I'm glad I was lonely enough to answer. We're terrible romantics. The worst, she agreed, but we're honest about it. Always. Sarah made a happy noise, like she approved of their conversation. They both laughed. Come on, Evelyn said. Thomas will be back soon with the supply wagon. We should start dinner. What are we making? Whatever we have, same as always. Sounds perfect. It's really not. It is to me. She smiled at him, this man who'd learned to see value in imperfect things, who'd learned that survival wasn't the same as living, who'd learned that sometimes the best things came from the worst circumstances. They walked into the kitchen together, passing the cradle where their daughter slept, the ledger that showed their profit, the window that looked out on land they'd earned through blood and tears and refusing to surrender. It wasn't the life either of them had planned. It was better, because they'd built it themselves, together, from nothing but an advertisement no one expected and an answer that changed everything. And that, Evelyn thought as she started cutting vegetables while Caleb bounced Sarah and made her laugh, was worth more than all the careful plans and safe choices in the world. Sometimes the bravest thing you could do was gamble everything on honesty, on partnership, on trusting that another broken person might help you build something whole. Sometimes desperation led to exactly what you needed. Sometimes mail-order marriages worked. Sometimes, against all odds and expectations, love grew in the hardest soil and became the strongest thing you'd ever known. The sun set over the Montana ranch that had nearly died and been reborn. Inside, a family ate dinner and made plans and laughed at jokes that weren't very funny but felt perfect anyway. And somewhere, in whatever place bitter old men went after death, Caleb's father probably cursed the fact that his cruel will had created exactly the opposite of what he'd intended. Not failure, but the kind of success that came from two people refusing to quit on each other or themselves. The best kind. The only kind that mattered.